Hello, folks, and welcome to our game this morning with myself, James Stapleton. As always, joined by Michael Verney, and we're here to talk about the four in a row. First, we remind you that we're brought to you by OurGameRetro.com. Use the promo code OurGame, you'll get 15% off. There is a huge selection of brilliant jerseys and tops. Look at that zip up that Michael Verney has there, celebrating the four in a row.
I reckon this is the nicest piece of kit. Now, there's a lot of nice kit on OurGameRetro.com, but I reckon this is the sweetest piece of kit. That's probably the one. If what you're wearing is probably what I'd like most to burn, but
and if you fancy burning one of these Tipperary jerseys, go to OurGameRetro.com and you'll get 15% off. We'll start off with I suppose just the result straight up: 30 points to 215. It was a hammer, and we'll leave it at that.
Well, it was a hammering in the wind-up, Shane. Imagine to say, like I was sitting beside Roy Curtis, and after 31 minutes, Limerick had 5 points on the board. He said, "What was your score prediction in the Irish Independent?" And I was like, well, I think I'm under pressure now. I had it like, what was it, 128 to 220. And imagine to say that they would hit 25 points for the remainder of the game. Like, that is crazy. And whatever about people talk about the 21 points in the second half, they'd scored 5 in 31 minutes, and then they managed to score 4 before half time. And I just think that broke Kilkenny hard to small bit. And I think there were a lot of glaring similarities between the semi-final against Galway and yesterday's game. It's like they absorbed whatever bit of punishment that Galway and Kilkenny threw at them. They maybe had it solved around the 25-minute mark or around the half an hour mark. They kicked on, crucially, broke their spirit before half-time, and then just obliterated the two of them in the second half. And I take Paddy Deegan's goal out of it, and, you know, this probably would have been a hammering in the second half. Kilkenny were 5 up when Deegan got that goal. I think Limerick responded with 10 out of the next 11 points. And, just a phenomenal performance, phenomenal stuff.
Yeah, like you look at the similarities with the All-Ireland semi-final with Galway, and they're very, very stark. Like, from the 28th minute on, Limerick won this game by 15 points. And it was something like the 26th minute on, give or take, against Galway, and they lost the game by 15 points. Like, what they're doing is absorbing the hits early doors and just taking over from there. I mean, again, like, you even go back to the 2021 Munster final, 10 points down against Tipperary, and then do the 16-point swing. But, like, you do look at some moments that Kilkenny had that might have been able to, I suppose, stem the tide somewhat. The 33rd minute, now, it was 1-8 to 7 at this stage. So, you know, Kilkenny are in good shape here. And a ball comes in from Mossy Keown, comes down off the post, and Owen Cody, he whipped on it on the rebound. And I think it just went wide. Right.
To me, now, that should have been, he should have taken his point, genuinely. I just think they needed to keep the scoreboard ticking over. And I think one of the biggest problems with Kilkenny's purple patch yesterday, and they had purple patches at different stages, is they just weren't able to get enough scores on the board. And like, when you have the strong arm on them, like, Kilkenny need to be going in 7 or 8 up, realistically, didn't they? And they were probably 5 to 6 points a better team, but they needed to be maxing out on all those chances, because it's like, you have all these chances. If you don't take them all of a sudden, like, you hit 1-6 in the second half. That's what you're restricted to. Very, very few chances. And if you don't hammer it home when you're in charge, you're in big bother against Limerick.
Yeah, started the second half then, 37th minute. Tom Phelan, who obviously got 3 points on the board, you know, very good performance for him in his first All-Ireland final. He got hooped when he had TJ Reid outside it. So that I mean, of course, Kilkenny went on to get another goal a little while later, but, you know, Limerick had got another few points as well, so it built their belief. Then after the goal, a few minutes after the goal, and Limerick had hit 4 points in a row, and it actually, I think they hit like 9 out of the next 10 points after the goal. But TJ played a lovely little slip ball inside to Mossy Keown, who slipped. Now, worst case scenario, he would have been looking to score a point. And you know what? TJ could have scored a point himself. But the goal was on, and of course, you should look to force it in those situations. Missed it. Then later on, Owen Cody, I think he was blocked. And then, of course, there was a goal mouth scrambler too. And then Alan Murphy, very late on, he, of course, who was it? Reedy, who nudged him away as well. So when the goal opportunities were there, they just didn't take enough of them. Like, Limerick had no real massive goal chance. There's a couple of like half chances. Aaron Gallan had the one-handed whip, I think, in the 22nd minute after after Nash had lofted the ball in. And then, do you count it as a chance at the start of the second half when David Reedy put that cross ball? He centred the ball and Galan's touch went to Ryan.
Yeah, if he controls it, it's a goal chance probably.
It's a goal probably, if you know.
Yeah.
So who would have thought that there'd be 8 or 9 goal chances for Kilkenny to score 2, and Limerick could have 2 half chances and not score at all, and they'd end up popping 30 points? Like, kind of nuts the way it all panned out.
Yeah, and like they've now scored they scored 30 points in 2 All-Ireland finals the last 4, and they well surpassed 30 in the other 2. They hit 332 against Cork and 131 last year. Like, it was amazing to watch it in the second half. There was a dozen minutes there where literally everything they hit went over the bar. And it's funny, probably mightn't have talked about it too much, but the Breeze actually had a massive say in the game. In the first half, O'Murphy was able to put one puck out down into the D that TJ Reid caught, and they were almost able to bypass that Limerick half-back line. In the second half, they could not penetrate the Limerick half-back line at all. Diarmaid Byrnes absolutely thundered into it. Kyle Hayes, who was brilliant, I thought, probably from the second quarter onwards, they just couldn't get past him. They couldn't get past Will O'Donoghue as well. And the ball that was just breaking over the half-back line in the first half was hanging on the 65 for lads to absolutely bombard into. And Kilkenny just it was very similar to stages of the game last year where they just couldn't get their hands on the ball, and Limerick totally dominated. They totally dominated O'Murphy's puck out again, you'd have to say. And Kilkenny played 4 across the full back line at different stages and played a short ball, but the second ball wasn't, trying to
might as well have been a
on.
pucker.
Yeah, kind of. They weren't taking on a man, trying to work an overlap and then try and beat the half back line. It was just a longer ball. It was just a variation of the puck out basically, and they got nothing off it. But like Limerick just totally put the squeeze on. The way I was going to think about it this morning, it was nearly a bit of a rope-a-dope from Limerick. It's like, and Kylie said after that they wanted to play into Hill 16. They wanted to play against the Breeze. They won the toss. It's like they absorbed everything that Kilkenny threw at them, and then all of a sudden, like the rumble in the jungle, it was like Foreman was just ready to be knocked over, and Kilkenny were just ready to kind of be pushed over as well. Amazing to think that they've won their last 2 games by 9 points, and they've won pulling up, having like really, really looked under pressure during Munster, and a point or 2 either way, and they may not have been in the situation. You'd have to say they've timed it perfectly yet again. It's the clean sweep again. People are saying, oh, their league exertions are going to take their toll. Maybe they took a bit of a toll in Munster, but they were still back to exactly where they wanted to be come the end of the game, come the end of the championship, and come the end of the 2 biggest games of the year.
What's also happened is that I don't have to wear a Kilkenny jersey to the Tip County final, which is, for anyone who missed it, we had a bet at the start of the year. If Tipperary won the All-Ireland, you'd wear a Tip jersey to the Offaly County final. Or did I have was it a haircut thing that you had?
I can't remember, but you were. I don't even know if I took a bet that day, but you were just that confident that Kilkenny wouldn't win the All-Ireland that you just said you'd do that. And listen, your confidence, albeit at half time, you were probably sweating a small bit, but your confidence paid off in the end.
Yeah. You know what? I did a tweet after the game, tongue in cheek. People are awfully sensitive. My God, look at this. I said Limerick, I was just watching on the big screen, and you could see JP McManus and John Kiley lifting the title. So I tweeted, Limerick Sugar Daddy, JP McManus brimming with pride as he lifts the All-Ireland title now with John Kiley. The Sugar Babies look on with delight. Like, there's 120 replies or something. People are just so sensitive. Get over it, lads. Get over it. I don't know of any more sensitive crowd. Well, it's up there between Limerick and Clare, really, for the most sensitive supporters. But lads, have a bit of sense of humour. We're praising you all the time. A bit of an old joke. Get over it.
Yeah, listen, the fact that they've had strong financial backing definitely helps, just like it helped with the Dubs, just like it probably helped with Glanbia being involved with Kilkenny, and even Kerry Group backing Kerry down through the years. But it doesn't buy generational talent like they have, and a lot of people should just be probably soaking up the success. Now, to be fair, you were looking for it as well. A party was kind of looking for it too. And now laughing face at the end might have changed things a small bit. But I'd say a lot of people genuinely thought you were being just a sour tip man on Ireland final.
Look, okay, I'm going to go through a few comments here. We've got Leo O'Connor and Nickey Brennan coming up on the show. Joe Butler, congrats to Limerick for a wonderful win and a really great display from a brilliant team. They went into overdrive in that second half and we were powerless to deal with it. Patrick Coleman says the cumulative winning score in the final of Kilkenny 06 to 09, 38 points. Cumulative winning score, the Limerick team 2020 to 23, 38 points, 9.5 points per game. Column Lions blind spot, greatest team of all time. Enjoy them while they're around, lads. Hurling has never been played to a higher standard. Would you agree with that?
Played to a pretty high standard, isn't it? Just one thing I just wanted to bring up there, like you're talking about the 4 in a row and they've obviously won 5, like their age profiles, right? Their age profiles lend to this team being around a hell of a lot longer. Just fly through it. Nicky Quaid is 34, Mike Casey's 27, Dan Morrissey's 30, Barry Nash is 27, Burns is 29, O'Donoghue is 28, Hayes is 25, O'Donovan 28, Lynch 27, Hegarty 28, Reedy 29, Tom Morrissey 27, Gillan 27, Flanagan 26, Peter Casey 26, Sean Finn 27, Declan Hannon 30, Cathal O'Neill 21, Adam English 20. Like, they ain't going away for a while. You can cut it any way you like, but they're going to be in around the scene for another 5 to 6 years. And they're probably, like, based on yesterday and how they finished this year and how they've coped with Hannon's loss and how they've coped with Finn's loss, like, was this as good as Limerick have ever been? Like, it's scary, really, from the point of view of, like, if you look earlier on the year, they were surviving, hanging on in Munster, and they kind of rode out that storm. They played themselves into form. Then all of a sudden, when they needed to be, they were, as good as they've been. I would say as good as they've been over the last 4 years, and maybe as good as they've been over the last 6 years.
So, like, through Munster, is it just the case that the Munster teams are better than the Leinster teams and they played 2 Leinster teams in the All-Ireland semi-final and final, and, the difference between, Leinster and Munster was highlighted in those games? Is it possible that that's the case? Like, people say, they've timed it perfectly. Well, no, maybe they spent most of their season playing against better teams, and then the Munster teams that came out beyond that, obviously Tip were very poor against Galway, and Clare did their Clare thing at Croke Park by not really getting it done. I don't know, maybe there's some element to that to it. I don't think it's quite as simple as that, but there may be some element to that.
I think they're, like, when you look at, obviously, Clare beaten in the last 2 All-Ireland semi-finals and coming out of Munster, Limerick are probably just a bit of an outlier, are they? And maybe one of those kind of great teams that just seem to be able to do it whatever way you like. But their ability to problem solve mid-game, mid-flow is outrageous. I've said it several times. You've been on the pitch, I've been on the pitch when things are going wrong. Like, look at 25 minutes into the game yesterday, you're thinking, oh, Limerick look heavy-legged here. A load of their best players can't get into the game. Kilkenny are swarming everywhere. There's 3 or 4 lads around the ball. And you're kind of thinking, there's a misconception that a team is fitter than you when they're kind of on top of you like that. Then all of a sudden in the second half, like, who's the fitter team in the second half? But their ability to problem solve, kind of think on the hoof and just come up with all the answers mid-game it's unrivaled. Like, definitely that aspect of their game is much better than Kilkenny's back in the day. I don't think Kilkenny had to problem solve like Limerick have had. I don't think Kilkenny had maybe even bad half an hours maybe like Limerick have had, and have just been able to turn it on like that. It's phenomenal. Usually you could turn it on in the next game when you're like, oh, we did X, Y, and Z wrong, and you're able to rectify it for next game. But they're able to do it mid-game, and that's a ridiculous trait.
So of the finals that Limerick have played in the 4 years, was there a challenge? Like Limerick to Tipperary 2009, like even now people would often say to me, that's the best game they've ever seen. Have Limerick had a challenge like that in a final, do you reckon, over the last 4 or 5 years? Maybe last year's the closest?
Yeah, maybe last year. Now, they never really looked like losing last year.
No. They were only behind for like 2 minutes, 1 minute and 1 minute at different stages.
Yeah, and it's funny, yesterday...
Sorry, it was only even level. They were never ahead.
Yeah. I think before yesterday, the only time they'd been behind was when Galway led. I saw a good tweet. Galway led 6-5 in the 2018 final, and Limerick had been ahead in All Ireland finals every minute since until yesterday. So listen, they suffered and encountered a fair bit of turbulence yesterday, but the way they were able to deal with it is just it's different gravy, really. And I think unless you're able to really maximize your time, the time that you're in charge, your purple patch against them, and be 7 or 8 up and ask them those really serious questions. If they're only within a score or two, you're in big bother. They will come hunting you down, and they came hunting Kilkenny down yesterday. And say like by the hour mark, no, by probably about 65 minutes, they had their prey, and they were basically kind of devouring Kilkenny, and it was a matter of how much they were going to win by.
Yeah, the way the Kilkenny team lined out, like the forwards, outside of Tom Phelan, who scored 3 from play, Owen Cody got a goal, and he did look dangerous, right? And there was that time when there was the tangle of legs with Mike Casey. They were in 45 yards of space.
Yeah.
If he had to get that ball, hard to know, he may have scored, but he was fairly well shut down from then on out. Brilliant and all as a player he is. Billy Ryan didn't score for play. Mossy Keown, I don't know if he's fully right yet after his injury. John Donnelly actually played midfield. Wally Walsh came in. He didn't score from play. Like, they just did not get enough. TJ Reid, obviously brilliant player, didn't score from play and had some great moments. But when you're approaching your 36th birthday, it is very difficult to be expected to take over a game. So the supporting cast just wasn't there.
Yeah, the lads that needed to step up, and I kind of named a few of them. And in fairness, Tom Phelan looked like he was going to be man of the match at different stages yesterday. And even he fumbled a couple of balls early and kind of thinking, oh, is he under pressure here? Then he came up with a couple of big plays. The one where he was hooked by Burns. He had Burns in plenty of trouble now.
Yeah.
He had Burns in plenty of trouble. And like, that's why Burns had a very good game, but I don't think he was man of the match or anything yesterday. Because he was probably one of the few that was losing his duel probably for about 50 minutes yesterday, I'd say. Losing, or, it was kind of in the balance or whatever, but he came good at the end. But as you said there, you named out 5 or 6 Kilkenny, not fringe players, but lads that needed to contribute 2 to 3 scores from play. And as dangerous as you say Owen Cody was, he just wasn't fed enough. Like, he barely felt the weight of the ball in the second half. There's a happy man this morning. I wonder is the voice gone, Leo?
No, not too bad, Mike. Not too bad at all. Just a remarkable occasion, a remarkable day for Limerick.
Can you believe it?
It's hard to believe, isn't it? Yeah, it's just one of those occasions where you just sit back and you have to realise what they're after achieving. Even if you look at it from 2018, and I don't be harping back and things, but 2019, that line ball that should have turned out to be a 65, if they got the ifs and buts of that, and put that in on top of what they've achieved yesterday, you know what I mean? They'd be going for 6 in a row. And it has been, it looks like something now that was very, very achievable. And like when you look back in yesterday and over the last 4 years, they've literally cantered over the line in All Ireland finals, bar last year's All Ireland final. Like the last 20 minutes yesterday, from the 50th minute to the 3rd minute, it finished up 13 points to 4. And they talk about Limerick being a third quarter team, in the last 20 minutes yesterday. It was phenomenal. The reaction, the energy, everything that they brought to it yesterday was just phenomenal. And their patience more than anything else. And they're all talking about it. I suppose every one of the players that mentioned about it, they stick to the process. And that's one of the things that they really, really did.
Can I just ask you about that patience and that trust as well, Leo? Darragh O'Donovan kind of said last night, kind of somewhat tongue-in-cheek, that he was looking around the dressing room at half-time and he thinks, I think Peter Casey might be taken off here. And he ends up with 5 points or whatever. But the trust that, like, Gerard Hegarty was under pressure in the first half. There's no point in saying any different. And there was a few other lads under pressure. But the trust in lads that they're going to deliver, that they're going to come good, I suppose trust is something that's earned, isn't it?
It is, and like they all know each other so well now. They're so long on the road together. Like it's the very same. It's like a mirror image of the Kilkennys, I think, of the Naughties, the Henrys, Michael Fennelly, they all around the place, and Jackie Dirls. They trusted each other so well. They knew that they'd get out of sticky situations, and that's what Limerick have done. It's their work rate. Like, the half-back line yesterday in the second half looked like, the Great Wall of China. I suppose they'll call it the Great Wall of Limerick now at this stage. Burns, Mr. Consistent, clipping over points. The point that he got from play, the quick free from Garrod, oh my God, what was it, about 110, 120 yards away? You know what I mean? And drove it straight as a die over the bar.
You were one of the few that saw it, because I was taking down a score. I think the previous score, or Hayes was fouled, and all of a sudden you're looking, and this ball has gone over the other end. So it was Garrod Hegarty hitting a short free.
That's for me. That was the funny part about it yesterday. Was Garrod took the quick free, but it seemed like about 10 seconds to get the ball over the bar. And when you're a Kilkenny player, when you're looking at this thing coming up, and you're looking and you're looking and you're looking, and next thing, oh Jesus, it's gone over. And it's over. And it just, you know, they're momentum swingers, and like, it's just phenomenal. You know, Kyle, I thought, was absolutely brilliant yesterday. Kyle Hayes. William O'Donoghue, someone described him last night as Mr. Granite. To me, like, he just shored up the whole thing. And I suppose it's a testament, you know, when you see him in the Sunday game last night, and then picking the centre back on the team of the year Sunday game, and yet he only played 2 matches there, you know, and he's been so consistent out around the middle of the field. What he does, his work rate, his turnover, and yesterday he just stood firm, very, very, very much so, at centre back, and took everything on board. And you know, his distribution has really, really improved. Like, it's just so many consistent attached to that Limerick half back line. Like, please God, and all going well, Declan comes back in next year, releases William O'Donoghue back out to the middle of the field. I'll tell you this, I'd hate to be outside. I'd hate to be outside there the week from now. We flip that right around the place there.
Leo, like, one of the big keys had to be the switch of Cian Lynch to centre forward after about 15, 20 minutes. I didn't see exactly what happened or when it happened, but I noticed it quick enough. Like, he scored 2 points. Limerick created about 40 other chances. He had his fingerprints on 10 more. Like, this performance for a guy who, you know, earlier in the year we were all wondering what's happening with him. They withdrew him during the Munster Championship for a while, came back in, showed signs against Galway. Like, to me, Cian Lynch was man of the match because he played for 70 minutes here. He was unbelievable.
Mm-hmm. Look, Cian's one of those guys, you know, that it's always there, right? And due to the injuries last year, and I was probably one of the ones that said it on local radio, he was carrying a little bit too much weight, I think, when he came back, and he was just that half yard off the pace. But by God, has he worked on it? And you see the results of it there yesterday. You know, it's a testament to him. It's a testament to our good friend Kieran as well. Like, you know, that's the stuff they're made of. You know, they don't let you go. Like, they stick with the process, and they do what they do. And Cian knew he had to work really hard, got back and did an extremely brilliant job for Limerick. I think he really stood up as a captain yesterday. When you look at him back over the years, I remember the first ball he got in 221 All-Ireland final as well. Ball was clipped out to him after about 20 seconds, 25 seconds. I think one touch in the hurl, he turned and banged underneath the Hogan stand there, just in front of the dug, where the dugout is, and he turned and went straight to the bar. Yesterday was one of those occasions for him yesterday as well. The 2 points he got in the first half were absolutely immense. It broke Kilkenny's momentum, I think, and that's when Limerick really began control of a situation. Like, there's one instance yesterday, and I suppose to me it was the changing point of the game. Kilkenny were 4 points up. I think it was Walter or went for it, and the ball came down off the post, broke to Owen Cody. And Owen Cody being the forward that he is, knew the chance was on, and it skimmed a foot wide, right? Came right across the face of Limerick goals. If that had nestled in the corner of the net yesterday, Kilkenny are gone 7 points up. That was, I think, around the 32nd minute, 32 and a half minutes gone in the game, right? And yet, the ball went up the field, and Limerick got a point, right? Instead of that, to me, that was it was really more than a 2 point swing in the game, where, like, Kilkenny could have gone 7 points up. They were 4 up. Cian brought it back to a point. I think it was Cian got a point, I'm not sure. And then Aaron Gillane got a free. TJ missed a free then, you know, and it just was, that to me was the defining moment of the All-Ireland. Limerick were going in at half time, playing with the elements, and down to a 1-score game where it really should have been a 3-score game, and throw in the goal straight away after half time, 5 or 6 minutes in the second half. You have a different All-Ireland final. And that's the famous Paddy O'Shea thing, the small grains of rice. I know Limerick looked to be superb for the last, as I said already, for the last 20 minutes of the game. But there's small little momentum changes that happens in All Ireland finals, and to me, yes, I think that was one of the big ones. Where, and don't get me wrong, it was on Cody being a forward, being the marquee forward that he is, and he went for it, and he knows that that was a half chance. He's a testament to his ability and his mentality that he knew that the half chance was there, and he went for it. As I said, if it ended up in the back of the net, it was a different game going in at half time.
Leo, the way that Kilkenny tried to set up or do things differently, Brian Cody's team versus Derek Ling's team, I'd have said one thing that they did was they set off the puckouts in the first half, which meant that the half backline wasn't thrown to the wolves like they were last year, where Limerick could fold in and then run out into space. I felt that Wally Walsh was on that right wing on Kyle Hayes, but he was kind of sitting off him almost at times, so that Hayes couldn't just kind of run into that 60 yards of space as he likes to do. But ultimately, obviously, Kyle took over the game. But like, what did you see Kilkenny doing that you think, got them in such a great position in that first half?
The first 5 minutes of the game, really, if you look at it, the first ball when it went down and Kilkenny cleared, when Limerick, Darragh Donovan got the first ball and drove it in, and Limerick cleared it back. And I just think it emphasised what Derek was trying to do, protect his half back line. TJ is the man who was back 50 yards in his own goal and cleared it. The next ball, the next puck out that came down the field, it came down that same wing again. And Walter Walsh was only 60 yards, 55, 60 yards from his own goals. I think the whole Kilkenny half forward line dropped back. I think Walter, I'll be honest about it, I don't think Walter's that kind of a player. I think that Walter's nearly better off. At one stage yesterday, I was thinking to myself, what would I do if I was Derek Ling? And one of the things that I maybe would have tried yesterday was to throw Walter Walsh in centre forward on top of William O'Donoghue. Because William sits, and if Kilkenny could have got the ball up that channel, right, where Limerick had just shored up at that stage, made it a physical battle between William O'Donoghue and Walter Walsh. That's one of the things that I would have tried yesterday. But definitely the way they sat back, Kilkenny came back to field in the first 10, 15 minutes of the game and really worked hard. And it creates an opportunity to get ball into the likes of Owen Cody and to get ball into I thought Tom Phelan was absolutely immense yesterday. He's worked with up and down the field. He was nearly playing as a third midfielder. He probably was a third midfielder. But yet when he got the opportunity to take that, when that's 10, 15 yards of space, when he got onto position, and he took 2 great points in the first half. I think he broke down the ball as well for Owen Cody's goal. Owen Cody just ran at the right angle and stuck the ball in the back of net. It was Kilkenny's work rate. It was Kilkenny's their urgency on the dropping ball as well, on breaking ball. Like the whole second half, Limerick, when the puck out was going long, when Owen Murphy was going long, Limerick were breaking the ball back down. So many players. David Reedy came back down, picked up ball. Like they just did what Limerick did, what they did in the process, and look, we all know what it is now. But in terms of where Kilkenny really lost it yesterday, I think was the urgency. That urgency, people said that they couldn't maintain it for the whole 70 minutes. Fair enough, it's an intensity, but yet they didn't have their pivots underneath their puckouts like they did in the first half. There was a massive urgency. I think Conor Fogarty going to wing back was definitely a loss to the Kilkenny midfielder, because Conor's one of those guys that really gets on breaking ball. You look over around the middle field, Adrian Mullen, well, he had a good game when Kilkenny were really, really in it. Adrian Mullen was very, very good. Overall, I think when you look at the second half, he drifted out of the game. But it's more Limerick's process, the intensity of Limerick, what they do. And if you go back and if you try to compare yesterday's Kilkenny team, the Kilkenny team of the noughties, the Kilkenny team yesterday was nowhere near as physically strong as the Kilkenny team of the noughties. That's the major difference, that if you compare the two teams, they've lost 2 All-Ireland finals in a row, right? How many times in the past has it happened that people have lost 2 All-Ireland finals in a row to other? It's not Kilkenny's mentality, it's not their frame of mind that they lose 2 All-Irelands in a row. They've been beaten yesterday, but I think they'll have to accept this by a really, really very, very good hurling team. I remember after the National Hurling League final this year, Shane, I was blown in Páirc Uí Chaoimh, and I came out and I said that day, I said, Derek Ling would be scratching his head to know where he was going. He tried, he went with the Billy Drennans, he went with the Timmy Cliffords, he brought on Jared Dunn that day, a lot of last year's under-20s. And, he tried to integrate him into a system. But that day alone, I think Derek learned a lot, because I said he'd be scratching his head going back down the bus to Kilkenny. Where is he going to get him to try and get over the line? But yet, Kilkenny, as they do over the years, almost Cody-esque now, I will say this, they stuck with players that were mentally mature, right? He didn't really introduce them yesterday. And going forward, I think that's one of the things that he's going to have to do to get this Kilkenny team up. He's going to have to bring in energy. There's possibly 3 or 4 of them that will be looking down this morning, scratching their head and going, have I the mentality to come back this year? I'm not doubting these guys, because these guys are all winners. The Richie Hogans, the TJs, the Conor Fogartys this morning, they're waking up and they're going, right, have we, where am I now? I know a break will do them good, but they're all with very, 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 very competitive clubs from Kilkenny, and that's one of the things, especially with Ballyhale, with TJ. Like, they'll want to win another county championship. They'll want to retain an All Ireland club championship, do 3 in a row. So it's phenomenal what's going on in their heads this morning. The break is going to do them the world of good. But yes, Kilkenny have not really unearthed any new talent other than Tom Phelan this year. I suppose Liam Blanchfield has really stepped up to the mark as well this year. But that Limerick team, like, look at Cathal O'Neill, and there's still 1 or 2 other guys around the place. Aidan O'Connor, I was delighted to see Aidan O'Connor yesterday. I think is a lad that, when he does mature and when he I suppose serves his apprenticeship in that Limerick panel, he's going to be massive, and I think that Limerick still have another 1 or 2. Shane O'Brien is another player. I think that, come next year, National Hurling League, John is really going to have to introduce these players and introduce the freshness back into the Limerick team again.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. I think that Limerick panel, and Michael talked about it earlier, that the age profile is pretty decent. Actually, while you mentioned the midfield there and Conor Fogarty going wing back, unless he was injured, I was surprised he was taken off at half time, because I thought he was doing okay. And Tom Marty,
I thought he was doing okay. Yeah, I didn't see the reason to make a switch now, being honest.
Yeah, but like, I got to ask you, like, a midfield of Adrian Mullen and John Donnelly, and I know it's kind of forced through injury to some degree, but like, I think you're left with 2 lads who are forwards, really. And I know Adrian Mullen, like, he's been wearing number 9 for the last year or so or whatever, so you might think he's midfield all the time, but I felt he was half forward more so last year. Like, think of his performance against Clare in the semi-final. So to me, there was an imbalance to that. And then also, while you mentioned the ages, Leo, I was looking at just the ages of the Kilkenny players afterwards. Owen Murphy, 32. Now, obviously, he's a goalkeeper and he can play on for several more years. Reed's 35, turning 36. Richie Reed's 30. Conor Fogarty, 33. Killian Buckley, 32. Wally Walsh, the same. Richie Hogan's 35 soon. Pádraig Walsh, 31. So the age profile is not brilliant when you consider that none of the under 20s were used, Mike.
Yeah, I just looked at the program last night in the train home, and I was thinking there's 5 or 6 lads here potentially that mightn't come back next year. That won't be the case. They're not all going to retire at like that. Maybe there'll only be 1 or 2. But when you look at it from a turnover, from a Limerick point of view, like, Graham Mulcahy is maybe the only one that might walk away, and he'd be mad to walk away. He's still getting game time with the best team in the country. So yeah, he's slowly introducing, like, Cathal O'Neill is now coming on All Ireland finals and scoring 2 points, having, served maybe a tough apprenticeship starting out that day in Salt Hill in 2021. I'd say Adam English is probably disappointed given some of the cameos that he's had this year, but their time will come. Like, but people would say, oh, Limerick are using the same players they've used since 2018. Yeah, there's a reason for that. Do you know what I mean? There's a reason. Like, none of these guys are slowing up at all. Their form is not really dipping, and it's grand saying that's. I think that's something that people clutch on to say, oh, they're using the same players, they're going to be tired or whatever. They don't look tired. They look, kind of energized. But just something I want to throw at you, Leo. When you think of the amount of turbulence that Limerick have been hit with down through the years, when you just off the top of my head, would say Hannon been out yesterday, Finn been out, Keane Lynch's hamstring, Peter Casey been out. Would say the crack that happened in New York that time. Would say Pat Ryan getting dropped last year. No, genuinely. But how they have managed all this, and to be honest with you, how John Kiley has managed all that and kept the train firmly on tracks is it's kind of unbelievable, really. Even Richie English been out. We were talking before the show, before the game yesterday, Shane. Like, look at the lack of options in defence, and they just plough on. It's amazing, really, that no matter what obstacle is put in their way, they just plough on through it.
Look, I'll be honest, Joe, and I've worked with John. I worked with John in 2011. John was selector in 2011 with me. When we get on the bus, we go into challenge matches and whatever, and John would come on and sit alongside me, and we were talking. Pat Donnelly was there, Pat Davern. We were really, we had good times at the start of it there. And when you look at it, and John would always say, right, what are we getting out of tonight? That was one of John's questions, and he's so meticulous. His attention to detail is absolutely phenomenal. John is a man. He's a leader, and he's a man's man. He's, like many times, we'd question different players, and next thing you'd hear this coming out, John, look, he's just going to have to get over it. This is the way it is. And that's one of the things that I always remember John for. He's just phenomenal. He's the energy he brings, his astuteness. He has laid himself down. He's up there with Cody now, 4 Irelands in a row, 5 and 6 years. Like, I know Cody was there for 22, 23 years. It's phenomenal. Like, and no one questions that. And no one can question John Kiley now. John Kiley's astuteness, along with Paul Kennerk on there, is absolutely phenomenal. It's the Alex Ferguson of football. You're just, you can't take anything away. It's meticulous. The background staff, everyone knows their job. Everyone knows what they're doing. And even as one or two of the players have alluded to it, then they all know their game, right? On the field, when you look at John, right, and he said it yesterday in an interview after the match, that their astuteness and how off the hoof, how they work things out themselves. John can say that all he wants, but I know that comes from John. That ability to adjust within a game, to get the word out to the field. Just on a different note, it's amazing Nickey didn't go down yesterday. The rest of the GA world can worry about that one now.
It's funny, actually, in the 39th minute, Mark Melbourne tried to run onto the pitch, and he was stopped by doing so by one of the linesmen. And actually, I think Tom Morrissey was down at one stage and John Keenan way of play on. Dan Morrissey had his helmet off at one stage and John Keenan way of play on. And just on John Keenan as well, like, to me, like, it was a brilliant refereeing performance from a point of view of you wouldn't have really known he was there. Any high challenges, he dealt with them fairly well. The yellow cards thrown out. There was never any fear of a red. There was never any fear of anything stupid happening. I'll put it that way, or a call that was going to turn the game that was debatable or whatever. And whatever they need to do to change the rules to make sure that he's able to referee into 2024 and beyond, they have to do. It's like saying to Tony Brown, who's playing with Waterford, Tony, you have to retire because you're 36. Like, that's not, you can't do it. So there's no reason why he should be told that he has to exit just because of his age, just because he's turning 50 or whatever. That's just a brief little aside.
The one thing about it, Michael, yesterday was, this is a remark of respect to John Keenan yesterday. The players trusted John Keenan trusted the players. Right, there was a mutual respect outside in that field yesterday. It was Limerick and Kilkenny going at it. Limerick going for 4 in a row, Kilkenny trying to break it, and every one of the players knew what they had to do. There wasn't a foul stroke drawn in that game yesterday, right? And it was just a mutual respect between all people involved, right? Even the umpires, I see them yesterday talking to the players, right, at various stages. It's a mark of respect. There was a ball went wide. There was a ball went out for a 65 yesterday. Should have been a 65 for Kilkenny. Limerick got it as a wide ball, right? And it was just one of those things where the umpire spoke through the players as well. I actually saw it happening. It's just everything was right about yesterday. John Keenan's performance yesterday was absolutely superb. He controlled the game. He refereed yesterday's All-Ireland final the way it should be refereed. And he spoke, and I have no doubt about it. I could see him at various stages talking to referees. He spoke to his linesmen, and it was all communication, and it was down to trust. And I think maybe, I don't know whether John had a word with the captains yesterday before the game or whatever, but it's certainly one that he was brilliant in my opinion, and he actually refereed the game of hurling instead of refereeing out of a notebook or out of a rules book, and that's the most important thing, and that's where referees gain respect.
Yeah, and like most of the time, you didn't even notice he was there. You could just enjoy the game. Like, so fair play to him, and congratulations to John Keenan there. Leo, I was going to ask you about the Kilkenny team, and like, they had themselves in a great position. Like myself and Michael talked about beforehand, because of all the injuries, Richie English, Finn, Hannon, so on and so forth. The only full backline option on the bench for Limerick yesterday that we kind of noticed was Aaron Costello, who plays midfield for Kilmallock. And after that, we were like, what happens in the full backline here for Limerick if somebody gets injured? You've already got a converted forward in Barry Nash. Obviously, he's brilliant. He can play anywhere. You've got Dan Morrissey, who can play anywhere in the backs as well, of course. But we would, traditionally would have been more of a halfback. And then you have Mike Casey, who I thought was absolutely brilliant throughout the course of the game. And then you have a half back line, which is Diarmuid Byrne's always been a wing back. Will Donoghue plays there for the club, of course, at times. And Kyle Hayes, who's a converted forward who, grew up as a back as well. Like, if there was an injury or two back there, like there would have been a little bit of a concern. And even like Burns and Donoghue got yellow carded as well, like early on. Like a red card could have changed things up as well. So the point I'm getting to is that Kilkenny probably weren't that far away from being in a position where they could really trouble Limerick.
See, well, Shane, there's one thing about that Limerick full back line, right? And I'll take off my Limerick hat here, right? You have Barry Nash who's named at 4, but does he really play there? No. So it's a case of Limerick going back. And this is one of the things where, if you were looking in and you're taking on Limerick, do you put in 2 out and out corner forwards and hold them back? And that's what I would do, right? And make sure that Barry holds his position. I think that Limerick had the ability to drift back one yesterday, like they did with William O'Donoghue when Declan went off. When Declan was unavailable for it, he goes back. At various stages, they were talking about Kyle going in centre back. Limerick really stick to the process, and that's what I think that Barry playing as a cornerback. I mean, like, you could get an all-star now if you hold Barry Nash scoreless in All-Ireland final. Barry went up the field yesterday and put a ball over the bar again. So from that point of view, like, I think that some of it goes in. But get back to your question, it would have been a very, very difficult situation for Limerick yesterday. I've no doubt about that. Aaron Costello does play cornerback. He has played cornerback for his club. Aaron Costello was the out-and-out cornerback that if anything went wrong yesterday. You also had the ability with Dan Morrissey and Mike Casey. Mike Casey can play fullback. Dan Morrissey plays fullback. And Dan Morrissey can go cornerback as well. So from that point of view, I think that the out-and-out switch yesterday would have been Aaron Costello going cornerback and then push whatever player was removed would have been removed. But certainly, look, just a very, very interesting All-Ireland final. And from that point of view, Kilkenny, if they had pushed up 2 corner forwards out and out and pushed Barry back the field that little bit further, it might have been a more interesting game as well.
Nickey, delighted to have you on the show this morning. What's the feeling after the game? And, it was a tough one to take, of course.
Well, look, the bottom line is that the best team won. I think Kilkenny did very well in the first half. It should have been 3 or 4 more points up at half time. But for me, the total turning point of the game was when Cian Lynch went centre half forward. You probably have discussed that already. When Cian Lynch went centre half forward, he totally dictated the game. He got 2 scores. He laid on 2 more scores, got a free. And that was 5-point return in that latter period of the first half. Akin to what Limerick done again in Galway also. So I thought the game turned at that stage, and I thought Cian Lynch was orchestrating everything out there. And to me, he was head and shoulders above everyone else yesterday, and how he dictated the whole game. And he was easily my man of the match.
And Nickey, is there anything more that Derek Lyng could have done in terms of the setup or anything to do with the Kilkenny approach?
Well, look, I mean, in the end, there was a phenomenal amount of space left down in the Kilkenny full back line. Were competing against their direct opponents in a lot of space with the ball coming in very low, which they love doing, and they will create that extra bit. Look, Tommy Welch picked up a bit of an injury towards the end of the match. This is not excuses. There was no question who the better team. Kilkenny probably could have shortened the final margin. I said this to Derek after the match as well. I thought it was a few times in the second half there was points there for the taking, and they went to go for the killer goals, which if you were running in, now Tom Phelan did that one time in the second half, and he went in and got in, faced up to 3 Limerick players coming out on him. You were never going to get through that. You were just going to be bowled over. He could have popped that over the bar, and I just thought myself that Kilkenny just should have been a little bit more patient in the second half when things were going against them and pop over the points and try and reduce the margin that way. But reality is, look, I'm clutching at straws here. They were never going to win the match, but at the same time, they could have made the margin at the end a bit closer. But they lost a lot of momentum before half time, and I think that was a bit of an issue. I think when Derek brought them into the dressing room, I think the heads were down a little bit, realising it. They should have been up, and they had to face a wind as well, which was stiffish enough, to be honest about it. And Limerick just their play in the second half was phenomenal. And we probably got our puck out strategy wrong as well. I mean, we were starting to hit balls down on top of Diarmuid Byrne and Kyle Hayes, and we were managing that in the first half. I thought Tom Phelan in particular had a good first half on Diarmuid Byrne, but I think when the play settled to Limerick's pattern in the second half, they certainly ran the show.
Leo, I'll let you go on this one. where's the end? Where's the end for Limerick? Kieran Carey has said that he reckons by the end of it all, they'll have surpassed what the Dublin footballers have achieved in the run from, we'll say, 2011 to 2020, and maybe this year. Like, how much more do you think is in the tank? What's the end game going to be when this Limerick squad eventually breaks up?
I think yesterday Michael gave him another 2 years, and I mean very, very straight. I think that not being arrogant about it. I think next year they're installed as favourites already. I think the hardest part for John next year is get players in the National Hurling League, get players up to the pace. But as I mentioned already, there's Aidan O'Connor, Shane O'Brien. I think they need more time next year in the National Hurling League and bring in a little bit of more vibrancy and a little bit more energy into the championship. I think whether Limerick go on, the challenge is there as well to win 6 in a row in Munster now. But certainly the challenge is to get to Croke Park again. I mentioned it a couple of weeks ago. When Limerick get to Croke Park, this team, it's like a home venue for Limerick to get to Croke Park. It's like being in the 1500 metres and you're coming around the last bend. You have 200 metres to go. And when they get to Croke Park, they can see the finish line and they get a new lease of life. And that's been proved over the last 3 or 4 years. I think, as I said yesterday, I think it has given them another 2 years. It's going to take a mighty challenge. It's going to take a mighty challenge for any other county. People are not mentioning the county that I'm going to mention, but Cork over the last 3 or 4 years at under 20 level to have players coming through. I think that's going to be the biggest challenge for Limerick next year. Certainly, the Clare challenge will be met. Tipperary, whether they're going to really step up to the mark next year, he has to find 3 or 4 new players that are going to be ready to go into a 15. So from my point of view, Limerick, without shadow of a doubt, saw this as major favourites next year. Kilkenny will always be there. They won't go away. Kilkenny are Mr. Consistency. And certainly, from that point of view, the Galway situation, Galway are small, still a small little bit off it. They've all to find players where Limerick are trying to find players to introduce them to a team that's winning All-Irelands, that's winning Munster Championships. As I said, another 2 years, may the best team win that comes up and challenges Limerick and takes them on and turns them over. Clare did it this year. If you look at the amount of games that Limerick have played over the last, I suppose, 5-6 years, there's an awful lot more games to win in All-Ireland now than there was back in the 80s, back in the 90s. So the miles and the clock is going to be a phenomenal factor. Provided they stay injury-free, we are, I think, another 2, definitely 2, possibly 3 years around the place.
You're after throwing a little spanner in the works there. So you're after saying about the amount of games that you've played to win it. Like, do you rate this 4 in a row better than Kilkenny's 4 in a row as a result of the amount of games and the quality that they've had to beat along the way?
This 4 in a row is a better 4 in a row than Kilkenny 4 in a row, I think, without shadow of a doubt, because the amount of games that they've played. But certainly, in terms of quality, I think it would be one massive challenge. I'd hate to be the slitter that'd be thrown between and this, as I said earlier, the Kilkenny the Naughties were a physically bigger, stronger team than this team that they have at the moment, and certainly they'd be well able to match Limerick in terms of physicality and their work rate. Phenomenal. And when you throw Henry Shefflin, Michael Fenley, Jackie Tyrrell, Mike Kavanagh, oh my God, like, that's quality, all over the place. And that's what I think Kilkenny are lack just a small little bit. They didn't have the physicality to match Limerick when it really came down to it. That 15-minute period, I would term the middle 15-minute period in the second half, where, as I said, 20 minutes to go, 13 points to 4. But certainly, look, it's a phenomenal achievement. Certainly the amount of games they've played and only beaten once, this year. And they've played through the tough times, COVID times. And look, I know I'm a Limerick man, but you've got to take your hat off them. They're absolutely phenomenal and very, very worthy 4 in a row All-Ireland champions. And as I said, throw the spanner in the works. Yeah, the amount of games they played, phenomenal.
Shane is smirking there because he said it to me yesterday and nearly got sick on a table in Croke Park. He said, "Who's the only team that Limerick weren't able to beat this year?"
Clare.
No, they beat Clare.
Eventually they played them twice, but the only team that they played that they didn't beat at some stage was Tip.
There you go. They'll hang on to anything they can get, Leo. Absolutely.
When's the cup presentation for
that? Wishful thinking, Michael. Wishful thinking, Shane.
Yeah.
Leo, thanks very much for joining us and enjoy the spoils of victory.
Be good. Bye.
Cheers, Leo. Come on.
Yeah, that's all kind of tongue-in-cheek stuff as well, because obviously that isn't really worth the paper it's printed on, Nicky. But Like, do you see this
Yeah,
stopping
you were touching at straws all right, Shane, there now, I have to honest.
It was more of a wind up than anything else, and I got what I was after. So that was a bit of crack. Is it what's coming in Kilkenny? Because Limerick did pull away, and they pulled away against Galway as well. They do this to teams, but do you feel like this is kind of, we're talking about the age profile? There's a lot of Kilkenny players, 7 or 8, that are over the age of 30. Are Kilkenny moving closer, or are they going to be going further away from Limerick here?
No, I'm afraid this is going to mean a rebuild for Kilkenny, in the sense that there's probably 5, maybe 6, maybe 7 players will probably not be involved next year, and we have to accept that. I mean, time waits for no man, as that saying goes, and Kilkenny are in that area now. These are players that have multiple All Irelands, have given great service to Kilkenny, and the bulk of them were in the starting in the subs, yes, and not all of them, and it's going to mean a change, and. We haven't had a great underage set up for a long, long time. We won 20 last year, but there's the circumstances. I think you have to be harsh on ourselves and say here that our opponents were missing key players at various times when we played at the very stages of the championship, bar the first game against Offaly. So, to be honest about it, winning a 20 last year was great, and it gave a bit of a boost, and it brought a few lads onto Derek's panel. But in the overall scheme of things, that's only one possible shining light in terms of where we have been coming. We haven't been performing at underage, and I think we have a fair bit of work to do now to try and assemble a new squad for the league next year. I think the Kilkenny Championships coming up, which start in 2 weeks' time, will be very interesting from the point of view of Derek Ling and his selectors. They are going to have to unearth probably as many as at least 10 youth players, I think, from a panel perspective. And that's not easily done, and it's not going to be easy to come back. Now, that doesn't mean that Kilkenny are not going to be very competitive next year. Of course, there will be, but in terms of matching the likes of Limerick in particular, and that's the benchmark for everybody. Limerick, Kilkenny are somewhat off the pace as we finish this year and look forward to next year.
Is a bit of a last dance, Nicky, feel to it, in the sense of Derek Lynn came in. Are you kind of thinking, you're kind of wondering in the first year, would there be not a clear out or anything like that, but would a lot of those new faces get a lot of game time? And perhaps they did in the league, but he kind of kept faith with a lot of the experience. Probably didn't work on the biggest stage despite winning 4 in a row in Leinster. So there's that feeling that there's going to be a hell of a lot of change coming down the road.
Yeah, but to be fair, to be fair to Derek, I think he did see the merit in holding on to those experienced players, and the majority of them were coming from the subs, and they were making an impact when they came in off the subs. Now, it didn't happen yesterday, so clearly, even before yesterday, irrespective of the result of yesterday, this was always going to be the last dance for quite a number of them. To be honest about it, and we have to accept the reality that time moves on. It will happen to Limerick in time as well. You were talking to Leo there, and can't argue with what he said about the 2 years, but it will happen to Limerick as well. But now the question for Limerick is, can they bring on further guys onto the squad that are really going to step in? He's making one hell of a job with guys like Cathal O'Neill and a number of more players there who would be on practically every other inter-county team. But Kilkenny have a bit of digging to do now to find at least 10 new panel members next year, and to make the whole scene competitive. And that's why the upcoming championships are probably going to be more watched from that perspective than was ever the case, because it will be a different looking Kilkenny squad next year. There's no doubt about that.
Do you feel that the players are there, Nicky? And like, for example, your own clubman there, Tom Phelan, he's made an impact this year, scored 3 points. I'm sure that was a great source of pride seeing him pop it over the bar, Conaghy, man. But like, he's 27, so they found somebody there, and obviously you'd have been aware of him all along. Are there other players that they can find out there, do you reckon?
Well, Tom probably would have made it a couple of years ago. He went on a J1 to America when I know that the lads were keen to bring him on board, but he had finished in UCD, and actually Nicky English coached him a lot in UCD and taught a lot of them. But I think you've asked a very good question there, Shane, and I think it's something that Kilkenny will need to consider, because we haven't had we've had no success at minor for a long time. We've had the under 20 success last year, but we need to keep that in context. That it may very well be that we need to look at the 24, 5 or 6 year olds now, and to see what can they bring to the panel. Because I'm not sure we're going to get really fantastic 20, 21 year olds. We may have to go a little bit deeper up the food chain. And there's nothing wrong with getting guys in like that who are maybe have who are more maybe mature in the sense of their years, and maybe their hurling needs to be honed a bit. But I think that's where Kilkenny need to look, and not always be looking to who has come through the ranks of the immediate minor under 20 teams in more recent years, because there may be better players actually up the line. And look, it's an opportunity for some of the subs. Yes, you saw Alan Murphy coming on there, Owen's brother. I think that guy is not too bad, and I think if he got a steady run of time with Kilkenny, he could be a good player himself. You need to give guys consistent games, and it was something similar with Tom Phelan. Earlier in the year, he was starting games being taken off, and I know there was doubts setting into his own mind as to whether he was up to it or not. So you have to be brave enough and give guys a bit of time. And ironically, I think the league will be important for Kilkenny next year in the sense of trying to get new players in, understand the inter-county scene, and try and develop their game and develop for the championship. So look, it's a big task for Derek. There's no point in saying other words, and I can't turn around and say that there was people missing off the Kilkenny panel this year that they really should have on it. I have no gripe whatsoever with Derek and his selectors, but they're going to have to start digging deep now and seeing what's out there in the next couple of months as the championships progress.
I think, Shane, the post-Cody era really starts next year. That's my own opinion. Like, he's basically carried on the legacy of Cody's squad. Now this is his first really rebuild. He brought in some lads and they got game time in the league and played some championship or whatever. But next year is the real kind of start, if you get me. There's probably a bit of a legacy from Cody's reign that probably carried on this year, and Derek changed up a few bits. But next year will be when you'll really see probably his stamp being put on it. And as Nicky says there, you would expect to see a hell of a lot of new faces around the place, because he's no longer looking at 2023 and just that year. He's now looking at 24, 25, 26, 27. What can he get out of a lad in maybe even two years time as well? I think he'd be looking towards maybe a more of a long-term vision from probably next year, probably from today onwards, I'd say, realistically.
Oh, yeah.
And Nicky, without suggesting that this was decisive because the best team won, and look, based on how they played there, no one was going to beat Limerick yesterday. But Killian Buckley's wedding being on the day before, and I'm sure he probably tried to get it moved and all that kind of stuff, but that can't have been an ideal preparation for Kilkenny players. A lot of the players would have been there, I don't know, standing around, sitting around, people asking them questions, all that kind of stuff, even for Killian himself, of course, and of course the bride. But like, that wasn't an ideal preparation the day before an All-Ireland final, was it?
Look, I'm not sure how much that affected at all. I suspect none of the Kilkenny players were there. Walter Walsh was groomsman, not best man, as a lot of people thought, actually. So he was obviously there. And I'm not sure it had any great bearing on the game, the result or anything like that. Yes, it was a bit inconvenient for Killian and Walter in that perspective. And to be fair to him, he thought the final was on next week, because next week was when it was on last year. So I think from that perspective, there might be a message there for any inter-county hurler thinking of getting any who have wedding plans. Just divide the month of July totally, and maybe just build in the fact that 2 weeks after the final is played, the replay takes place. So maybe factor that into your timeline when you're planning your wedding in future. So if you're one of those counties that's likely to get there, maybe just bear that in mind, because it's a distraction rather than it had no bearing on the game, Shane. I wouldn't for 1 minute put it down as an excuse, but it's a distraction. And look, to be fair to Killian and Eve, their wedding is one of the most important days of their life as well, to be fair. And they had it planned meticulously with their families and all that, and they were entitled to have a joyous occasion, notwithstanding what was following the following day.